Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. On a cold, gray December morning, New York City stretched slowly under a leaden sky. The gleaming sidewalks reflected the neon lights of the signs that never truly went out, even at dawn. The air was saturated with humidity, and the wind blew in gusts, biting faces, lifting coat collars, and forcing people to walk faster, heads down. A black Bentley pulled up slowly at the corner of Fifth Avenue, in front of the stately entrance of the Metropolitan Crown Hotel. The rear door opened with studied slowness, and a man stepped out. Charles Morrow, 44 years old, ash-colored tailored suit, charcoal cashmere scarf, impeccably polished Italian leather shoes. He wasn't walking. He was sliding along the sidewalk, like a man accustomed to the world bending to his passage. His merino wool coat, falling perfectly over his broad shoulders, seemed to protect him not only from the cold, but also from the surrounding reality. His face was closed, handsome in its cold way, hardened by years of ambition, social climbing, and fierce bargaining. His gray eyes, piercing and calculating, usually scanned the world with surgical indifference. The founder of a real estate empire built on the ruins of working-class neighborhoods that he had developed, Charles lived in glass towers, traveled by private jet, dined with senators, and his name regularly appeared in Forbes, the Financial Herald, and the business world. He had the money, the power, the access. And somewhere, without even realizing it, he had ceased to have a soul. He hadn't looked at the street for years. He hadn't paid attention to the faces in the subway, the children sleeping on the steps, the hands outstretched on the sidewalks. He had protected himself from them like a virus. Suffering humanity didn't enter into his equations. But that day something froze him. He was about to climb the steps of the Crown when his gaze was caught by a barely perceptible movement to his left. He turned his head, mechanically at first, and his breath caught. Under the shelter of a subway station entrance, barely protected from the icy wind, a huddled figure tried to form a united front around two children. A woman, black, emaciated. Her face was hollow with fatigue, her cheeks lined, her eyes dark circles like those of a permanent insomniac. She was sitting on a soggy piece of cardboard, her back hunched, holding against her two children who were sleeping or pretending to be. They were small, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Twins, apparently, wrapped in a threadbare, stained blanket, too thin for the bitter cold of that morning. Their small faces barely peeked out of the fabric, their noses red from the cold, their hands huddled together. Passers-by passed by, indifferent. Some even averted their eyes, as if avoiding a harsh mirror. Others frowned, quickening their pace. In this fast-paced world, a mother kneeling with her children on the sidewalk was a nuisance, a burden, a reminder of everything we didn't want to see. But Charles didn't move. A detail had just strangled him internally. Something shone in the woman's hand, under the hem of the blanket. A ring, silver, adorned with a slightly cracked turquoise. Small, discreet, of no apparent value, but unique. He recognized it immediately. Her heart skipped a beat. Her legs seemed to suddenly feel heavy. The wind was gone. The street became a distant murmur. He knew this ring. He had given it to her 20 years ago, in a modest Brooklyn cafe, between two dreams too big and a love too pure to survive. He approached it slowly, as if holding his breath, as if in a dream from which he did not want to wake up. The woman felt a presence and slowly looked up, and the past hit him hard. She was no stranger. It was not just another figure. It was her, Elena. The shock was such that he almost took a step back. She too looked at him, a little longer, and her eyes, at first dull, widened with painful stupor. Elena? He whispered, his voice breaking. She blinked. Her face showed no anger, no joy, no surprise. Just infinite fatigue. A silent resignation. But something, deep in her dark pupils, stirred. A spark. A recognition. Charles. His voice was hoarse, hollowed by poverty and the years. But it had that unique warmth, that timbre he had never forgotten, even amid shareholder speeches and society cocktail parties. And in that suspended moment, among the honking taxis and the passers-by hurrying, two worlds so long separated had just collided again. They met when they were 20, at a time when the world still seemed full of possibilities. It was a warm autumn on the Columbia campus. The trees were turning copper, and the library halls echoed with impassioned discussions. Charles, a senior in law school, was already charting his course to the top, a confident dandy in a three-piece suit, with a piercing gaze and impeccable diction. He was known for his brilliant presentations in constitutional law classes and his fiery debates during mock hearings. Elena, on the other hand, was different. A comparative literature student, she wrote poetry in secret and read Faulkner and Dostoevsky on the campus steps. She wore colorful scarves, laughed gently, and had that light in her eyes that only those who have suffered without losing hope possess. She came from another world. Born in Harlem and raised by a single mother who was a nurse, Elena grew up with dignity, but not comfort. Her mother worked nights in the emergency room to make ends meet, and Elena learned early on to fend for herself, to care for her little brother, to cook, to study late, to dream big without hoping too much. He was the son of an investment banker, the kind of man who had a Swiss watch before he came of age, a reserved seat at Yale, and an inherited address book. But Charles had never really liked this world of appearances and cold smiles. Perhaps that was what had drawn him to Elena. Her disarming sincerity, her way of speaking about the world with words he had never heard at ambassadorial dinners. They had loved each other quickly, strongly, intensely, in small cafes in Morningside Heights, on park benches, in dorm rooms decorated with books and dreams. Their hands had found each other without hesitation, and their bodies, like their minds, had discovered each other with the passion and sincerity of first times. Love doesn't follow social lines, inheritances, or statistics. They had loved each other in a hurry, in the illusion that love was enough to break down the invisible walls of their origins, that together they would invent a world in their own image. And then, Harvard. Charles had received a prestigious scholarship, an opportunity few turned down, and even fewer with a family to convince. His proud father had spoken of future, network, merit. Elena, on the other hand, had smiled bravely, supported him, and even pretended to believe they would write to each other every day. The day before she left, he had slipped a small box into her hand. A ring. Simple, silver, with a modest turquoise stone. "So you know I'll be back," he had said. She had believed it. But life. She has this cruel talent of defying the most sincere promises. The weeks turned into months. Charles became absorbed in his studies, in his internships, in his ambition. He wrote a few times at first, then less and less. His father introduced him to good families. He went to parties where Elena didn't belong. Little by little, he tucked her into a part of his heart he thought he could forget. Meanwhile, Elena discovered she was pregnant. She remained alone for hours, sitting on the edge of her bed, the ring between her fingers. She could have called him. She could have written to him. But pride is sometimes the last refuge of dignity. She didn't want to beg for a love that might no longer be there. So she said nothing. She kept the child. Then, discovering there were two of them, she gritted her teeth harder. She tried to build another life. A man had entered her life. Antoine. He was stable at first. Hardworking, decent. But as soon as the twins were born, everything changed. The screaming, the beatings, the paranoia. He became violent, uncontrollable. And one morning, he disappeared, just as he had come. Without explanation, without a goodbye. Elena found herself alone, with two babies, unpaid bills, and a belly still aching from childbirth. She had fought. Night work, office cleaning, babysitting. She slept 2 hours a day, sometimes on the subway between shifts. She held on. For them. For her sons. To give them a better life. But rents were rising, assistance programs were dwindling, calls to social services were going unanswered. And one day, she lost her apartment. The shelters were full. All that remained was the street. And the ring, still on her finger, like a useless talisman, like an irony of fate. Under the subway shelter that morning, she had lost all illusions. And there he was. Him, the father, the young love, the man of vanished promises. "Why did you never come back?" she asked, her eyes wet, her voice broken by years of silence. Charles remained motionless. He didn't make excuses. He didn't cite work, studies, or family pressure. There was nothing left to hide. I was a coward," he replied. And he felt, for the first time in a long time, the bitter taste of shame. He looked down at the children. They had half woken up. Their eyes, curious and suspicious, stared at him. Dark, deep, intelligent eyes. Elena's eyes. But he saw something else in them. A familiar glint. He understood. And them? He whispered, his throat tight. Elena didn't answer right away. She ran her hand through one of the boy's tangled hair, then looked Charles in the eyes. These are your sons, Charles. Charles was upset. He had led multi-million-dollar deals without flinching. He had conquered markets, faced down ruthless boards of directors, built an empire through sheer coolness and foresight. But here, kneeling on this icy sidewalk, beneath a damp-infested subway shelter, his world was reeling. Nothing had prepared him for this. Not his bank accounts. Not his trips to Singapore. Not his Entrepreneur of the Year awards. He looked at Elena, thin, tired, her face hollow but still dignified, as one might look at a truth one has run away from for too long. Then his eyes slid to the children. Two little boys with golden skin, huddled together in their sleep, oblivious to the past, the future, the shock of the present. Two children who had never known the warmth of a home, who had grown up in cold, fear, insecurity. His children. Charles felt a burning rise in his chest, a raw, unfamiliar emotion. Not just guilt, something deeper. A mixture of pain, brutal tenderness, silent gratitude. He had created them, unknowingly, and now they were here, vulnerable, and he could no longer look away. He knelt slowly, as one approaches a sacred truth. You're coming with me. Now. Elena stared at him warily, her back still straight despite the cold. She had learned to depend on no one. She had seen pity in the eyes of too many passers-by. She didn't want it. I don't want your pity. It's not pity, Charles replied, his voice hoarse. He placed a hand on his heart, almost as if making an oath. It's my responsibility. And it's even more than that. She wanted to reply, but the words stuck. The boy shuddered, and in Charles's eyes, she saw neither condescension nor triumphalism. There was no calculation, no pride, just naked, sincere pain. A man on the ground, facing his faults, but standing firm in his desire to make amends. She nodded slowly. That same evening, Charles installed them in a discreet apartment, away from the hustle and bustle, yet warm. 2 bedrooms, new blankets, gentle heating, a kitchen stocked with provisions. No unnecessary luxuries. Just comfort, dignity, something to breathe. He did not impose himself. Every day he came, sometimes for 30 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours. He didn't force anything. He observed, learned, and let himself be guided by the life he had missed. He learned that Leo, one of the twins, was a dreamer, curious about everything related to the sky. He built rockets out of toilet paper rolls, asked questions about the stars, and collected pictures of galaxies torn from old magazines. Malik, on the other hand, was more reserved, silent. He drew sad faces, shuttered houses, leafless trees in a battered notebook. He was used to shadows, whispers, and doubt. But sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, he smiled. Charles watched them, fascinated, his heart wrenching. He didn't know how to be a father, but he knew he wanted to learn. Elena, on the other hand, kept her distance. She spoke little. She observed a lot. She let him in, but never too close. There was an old pain in his eyes, frozen like broken glass. She still couldn't forgive him. He was the one who had left, the one who had broken his promise. And she had paid for everything. But one evening, everything changed a little. It was a Wednesday. Charles had come with a model rocket for Leo. He sat with him on the carpet, helping him assemble the pieces. Malik watched them silently, leaning back on a cushion, his notebook lying beside him. Elena was in the kitchen, making tea. She watched them out of the corner of her eye. Charles gently explained how to insert the stabilizing wings. Leo nodded, concentrating. There was something peaceful, something new, in the air. Not yet a family, but something like one. When the children were in bed, Charles stayed a while longer. He got up to leave, putting his coat around his shoulders. It was then that Elena whispered, almost without believing it herself. You are different from the man I knew. He froze, slowly turned his head, because I understood what I lost. And I don't want to lose it again. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. A silence full of possibilities, of questions, and perhaps the beginnings of forgiveness. Elena didn't answer. But that evening, she opened the door without looking away. One summer morning, months later, the city still seemed asleep. The sky was gently turning pink on the horizon, the sun hesitating to pierce the freshness of dawn. On a nearly deserted beach, only the murmur of the waves disturbed the tranquility. The twins, Leo and Malik, had launched into a sandcastle battle, laughing uproariously, carefree and free. Their simple, radiant joy filled the air with a new lightness. Charles and Elena walked slowly, side by side, their footsteps disappearing into the wet sand. Their gaze wandered sometimes toward the horizon, sometimes toward each other, as if to probe the path they had traveled, so winding, so painful, but also so rich. "I loved you like one loves once in a lifetime," Elena whispered, her voice trembling but soft, laden with memories and forgotten promises. Charles stopped, looked at her with an intensity he had never dared before. "And it took me 20 years to understand that nothing else was worth as much," he replied, his throat tight with emotion. She looked into his eyes for a long time, as if to make sure that this time he wouldn't leave. Then a discreet smile, shy but sincere, lit up her face, marked by trials. "So maybe we still have time," she breathed, full of hope and restraint. With a natural, almost instinctive gesture, he took her hand. The same hand that still wore the old silver ring, adorned with a slightly cracked turquoise. This ring, more than a simple jewel, had become an invisible but unalterable thread, weaving together their past, their present, and perhaps a future. Charles was no longer the cold, distant businessman she had known. This ordeal had transformed him, opened his heart to feelings he had long repressed. He had learned to listen without judgment, to love unconditionally, to give without expecting anything in return. Elena, for her part, was gradually rediscovering her inner voice, her scorned dignity, the intense light in her gaze. She was no longer just a woman broken by life, but a strong mother, a lover capable of forgiving, a woman reborn. The twins, under the protective gaze of their parents, grew up in a home where love, truth, and patience now reigned. And whenever Charles was asked why he had given up his world of money and power to build this new life, he smiled gently, as if the secret were simple, almost magical. "Because I saw a ring in the street." Then, gazing into the distance, he added, "And I saw again the dawn that I had left behind."